Are software developers and designers like oil and water, or instead the new Turner and Hooch? Because who doesn't love 1980s Tom Hanks movies? Well, both groups have the same goal of making the customer happy, but speak different languages and go about their jobs in different, often conflicting ways. Whether your design team is separate from your software team or one big, happy, cross functional family, you need to find ways to get along. So, this episode is for you. Recorded live in front of a Twitch audience, this is Dev Matters. And we're back. I'm joined today by Ben Sanders, who has led design teams for over 15 years and is the head of design at Sleuth. We both used to work at Atlassian, where he led design across buyer experiences and cloud solutions. Personally, from experience, Ben is not only a great designer, but very passionate of finding ways that design can be integrated into the dev process. So here to tell us more about it is Ben. Welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
Now, before we get too much into this topic, I wanted to kind of level set a little bit. Maybe some of those out there aren't used to working with a designer or works with a design team, but they're in a separate place. So there might be some confusion around what exactly a designer does. For example, they might think, I might think, no, they might think, we'll definitely put it on them, that a designer is somebody who makes it pretty. And so if I just use Bootstrap or some pretty thing, I don't need a designer. Is that right?
All right. So, are you asking me what we do?
I'm asking you, yes.
All
What does a
right.
designer do?
Well, let's make a few assumptions. Like one, it's modern day. We're not talking about 1999 here.
Fair enough.
Let's also assume we're designing products because that's important as well. Um, so we essentially just solve design problems, right, for the customer.
Do you want to?
We do so usually in the presentation layer and with a bunch of methods and practices that help give customers better experiences, whether it's on a screen or a component on that screen or across many or multiple screens or services. I think it's really important here. Like this just gets muddier every year, just like titles change. Similar, like the industry evolves, and like I find more and more overlap lately, which causes more and more contentiousness in that space. Like in other words, like what does a designer do versus a front end developer? What if you have a really good front end developer? Do you need a designer?
Well, that kind of
I think
reminds me that I had a question about that. So it feels to me like designers, since you're doing visual things, it's
Mhm.
easy for everyone to have an opinion. Whereas, for example,
Yeah.
me as a back-end developer, if I do something, people don't care what I do. As long as it works, they leave me alone. So it feels like designers have it hard. Is that right?
I- Yes, and I would correct what you're saying. I'm sure if you're a backend developer, you may be judgmental of another backend developer's work. So
True.
we'll just
But I
say
don't
we're a
have
bit more in the spotlight, right?
yeah, I don't have the entire company from CEO to sales and
Yeah,
marketing all have an opinion.
I think that's really important. Yes, like a lot of people do have an opinion. You do have to be able to filter a lot and listen deeply to like what people's opinions and what matters in them. But I think there's an important point here, which is that and I've never worked at an organization, a medium or an even small company where you are not driving for quality. So I think that creates a lot of tension in the relationships here. Like in other words, what I think is really dicey is that I'm maybe trying to drive perfection in my own way, and I may be combative to like a developer because of the pressure that's on me, if that makes sense, right? It's the same way a developer might be being pressed for like reliability,
Yeah,
right?
that
Like you're
okay.
being judged on quality. So there's a bit of empathy here, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, just to help go down that empathy train of thought, what would you say for an average designer? Like, what keeps you up at night? For example, as a developer, it might be the system going down and I get paged, and I'm literally kept
Yeah.
up at night because the system went down. For a designer, where do you see as the frustrating part of your job, the part that really stresses you?
I'd like to answer that in two different modes. The 2003 version of me, I'm awake at night because it looks like shit, and that is my portfolio, and it's so important to me, right? The 2021 version of me, I'm up at night more about the strategy stuff. So, for example, like when are we going to fix what we fix? When is our opportunity to make fixes? Because we do make a lot of trade-offs in what we do, especially at a startup nowadays. We kind of swallow decisions like we're going to get to that later, and we all know that. But I often worry like, will we get back to it? In other words, when we make trade-offs and we ship things and we agree that shipping things may not be it might not be the best time to polish them and make things perfect. We will actually get back to them. So I stay up a lot wondering when and how to get the team to get back to things amongst all the other priorities.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, especially in your kind of leadership role, where you're not
Mhm.
you're looking at the bigger picture, not just kind of how the pixels to get put together.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's like you're
Um,
finding opportunities, right?
right, right,
Mhm.
right, exactly. So again, coming from the standpoint of not knowing that much about designers, one thing that is can feel how to put this. One thing that perhaps is a criticism of designers that sometimes it feels like designers jump on different trends that are cool, like low contrast text or lots of white space or whatever, and don't prioritize function. Now, having been
Hmm.
in the industry for as long as you have and gone through the different phases, do you think that is true, or am I completely off base?
No, I think it is true to some extent. Let me think about the best experience I have with this that I could share. Um, so I think the way to sum this up is that when a trend comes into play, we don't have as much out there. There might be like libraries or CSS, that people can just kind of copy and paste. Not that we all copy and paste, but I mean we don't have a lot of like of the core stuff already built for us. So what you end up here is with really shitty conversations where you hand something or you push something onto your partner, which is your developer, and they're like, "Okay, that's cool, but what about this 300 other micro interactions?" So I think the point I'm making here is that any experienced designer is going to consider that and not want to go down that path. So I remember times very specifically back in the mobile days when mobile was very new. I remember being on a team that was actually siloed from the development team, and then there was a culture where we would like be combative. Like our creative director was actually like fighting with the engineers all the time in front of us. And why that was important is because we were handing over these specs that were incomplete, right? And we didn't really know. We were just like, you can build this. And we were taught that like, oh, like just keep pushing them. They'll build it. They're just telling you no. They're pushing back because they're mean. That's not really the case. They're pushing back because there's so many unknowns. And what ended up happening is we would often go hundreds of $1,000s over budget and then hundreds of hours over in our time because your developers would then throw their hands up and say, I don't care what you want to do. You just tell me how you want it. And now the onus is on you to go design every single one of those micro interactions. So to get circle back to your point, the trends come and go. I think when you choose a trend, yeah, you definitely have to be careful about like how much extra work is that going to be.
That's interesting.
And
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I think your more junior designers won't think like that. I had to grow in this. I can give examples of when I didn't, of course, but um, yeah, huge apologies to all the people I didn't think about this with, right? Because I would push and be combative and have really shitty conversations with people just thinking I wanted it my way and this was the trend, you know.
That's really interesting that you bring that up. I particularly found interesting where you're talking about the technical aspects of it. Like you're
Mhm,
not just thinking what's the perfect thing on paper or what's the perfect thing on the screen, but you're
mhm,
thinking how can they reuse a library for this? Is this kind of a known thing, or I'm going to have to create something completely from scratch? Like, I guess that's something I didn't really fully appreciate. Is it just feels like a designer sometimes they just sit in Photoshop and they just kind of make it all pretty and then throw it over to devs and say, go
yeah,
nuts, and then devs like, oh,
mhm,
the crap. But you're saying that's actually not true. That the limitations a developer would have to go through, what libraries and things like the
mhm.
existing patterns, is a key part of your thought process.
It is, and I think only your seasoned people are gonna realize that. There's a hard road that I had to go down to learn that, like a very shitty one of like bad feedback, bad team morale, learning to interface, understanding and having a lot of respect for this stuff, and learning by doing essentially. And yeah, I think your less seasoned designers are going to move toward a thing without thinking and throw it over the fence. Your more experienced designers are going to be embedded on the team exploring ideas together. Like, so for example, like, I take that example of the mobile team. I moved on to a team later where I learned so much and was able to get feedback. For the first time, I was working on an agile team, and I was trying to throw things over the fence, and they were throwing things back at me, going like, "Yeah, okay, but like, what about these other 300 interactions, right?" And then like this feedback and all this stuff to learn from that helped me grow. So then my next iteration in this, I was able to be like, "Okay, we need to explore together. This is not just about me. This is about what will make it go, right? Like, I don't make the work go. I just make the pixels. And if I make pixels that aren't able to go, we're just fucking the customer at the end of the day, are we not? Because maybe they've been waiting on a feature, and I'm taking a bunch of people and saying, "Hey, I want this thing to look like this and act like this and be like this trend over here." But meanwhile, the customer's been waiting for this feature for 6 months, right? Am I going to make them wait longer? So you learn these lessons. And then I think the bigger one too is just the team morale. You learn that these people are your partners, and it's very essential for you to understand um, their process a little bit more and how they work and get closer to that, because again, it's a partnership. It's so muddy, right?
Well, I couldn't have written a better transition if I tried. So the next section that we want to talk about is, can developers and devs get along? But before we do that, let's have a word from our sponsors. Do you want to ship code more frequently? Are deployments stressful events that you avoid? Well, Sleuth can help, and let me show you how. Sleuth is deployment mission control for shipping continuously. It helps developers coordinate and track the health and progress of deploys so that they have the trust they need to ship code faster. Modernizing a dev team is a tall order, but one that pays off in both productivity and developer happiness. Sleuth might be just what you need to pull it off. And we're back. Hopefully the second time watching the commercial where I meant to press the button was better than the first time where I accidentally pressed it. Blasted everyone's eardrums for no apparent reason. Anyways, we're back. And so what we're talking with Ben about, can devs and design get along? We talked a little bit about what it's like as a designer, the challenges that you have interacting with teams. Sometimes that didn't go well. Let's get right down to it. Is it possible for devs and design to get along? Or really, should they always be in two separate rooms where devs just throw up their hands and say, I don't care, just tell me what to do and I'll build it?
Yeah, there's actually a great point there. I just want to cover that. So the answer is going to be a little bit of yes and a little bit of no, and that's a good thing. But I think one of the more important things we should talk about right now is this whole, if I had $1 for every time I had a developer or even myself say, "I'll make whatever you want. Just tell me how you want it." This is the first and most loudest signal that you are in an unhealthy relationship with your partner. Um, for example, this is often the result of you wanting designs to be overly specific, and you haven't done exploration with your team. You've just made a decision and handed it to them, and they may have a different opinion. Rather than exploring together and hashing that stuff out early on, you're in a very reactive state that isn't constructive for anybody. Because anytime anybody ever says to me, "I'll make whatever you want, just tell me how you want it," now we get into the whole micro interactions. So I may have to now spend the next week designing every single micro interaction for this thing, rather than had I worked with somebody early on to you know resolve this earlier. So it's essentially be like, you never want to hear somebody say that. You want to really come into it being like, "Oh, we decided together we should make it like this. We found some cool stuff and some cool patterns that exist, or we decided to innovate here, and here's how we do it." That way, I think your team's going to be like, or your partner is going to be really primed to like make good decisions. So you're kind of getting into that the bubble of trust with each other. So the whole yes and no, I think yes and no in that there should be a little bit of tension, but good tension, like healthy tension. I love that word. I think it's called like positive agitation, and I think that's really important. Like when a dev challenges me to be better, that's amazing. Like, "Hey, did you see what this product over here does?" Like, that's such good feedback for me, because now I'm like, "Oh shit, like this dude's on it." Like, you know what I mean? Or this person, or this developer is like, they like what they do too. And now we're speaking the right language. So um when I say yes and no, yeah, I think the healthy tension is good, right? Because you have different goals, at times, especially with backend. Backend might be trying to deliver, services for you to build on top of. So you do kind of want a little bit of good tension there. Again, not just to call you out, but also to understand, like, what people do and why is it different to what you do.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see how that would be better. Can you, just to help me understand a little bit better in my mind, could you give me like a specific example of when you worked really well with devs? And just to be clear, present company excluded,
Mhm.
obviously that would have been your example. So I want you to pick another one.
Can I start with when we didn't, and then
Oh,
go to when
yes.
we did? It might be a little bit. If it begins a rant, just let me know. So,
Go for it.
obviously, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I started working in a time when designs was really throwing everything over the fence. So, a couple key moments that are when it was bad. Of course, at that app company I spoke of, where we would throw things over the fence, none of those specs could get created. It was just a really unhealthy environment for everybody. But then I recall working on a project called Auto Trader. I'm at a mobile company, and trying to throw designs kind of over the fence and really getting my ass handed to me, from just negative feedback to, like, I remember an engagement officer was like, "Yeah, your work is really great, but you're gonna need to have some better skills when it comes to collaboration, etc." So then moving on to like when it did work, the first time that I really saw that this worked, so I kind of took those experiences coming out of that project, and I went on to go work at a product company. And I noticed that this product company was very green. Well, the team was very green. The customers had really been waiting for features in the mobile app. They had nothing. So for the first time, I'm like starting to explore together with the team, evaluate the team, how we can deliver value rather than just going and sitting at my desk and designing the most beautiful, outlandish thing in the world. Really getting to know what the development cycle looked like and how we could ship more value. So I went from getting all this feedback and experience on a very high pressure project at another company and taking that and learning to evolve myself, into a person who thinks about more and has a bit more respect for the team as a whole and where I fit in. So now imagine I am one person on a team of 8 or 9 developers, or maybe even more. I'm beginning to realize, like, I'm not I might be a part of this process, but I'm not the main part. I'm not in the spotlight. And that's a very designer thing, I think, when you're younger, is you're like, I made the experience. I am this thing. So you start to let go of that. And then for the first time, you're really exploring. And at the end of the day, what we decided to do was to ship less quality, but faster, because we knew if the team started to ship more quality, we wouldn't deliver. And we were really on the hook to deliver value to customers. So we made this decision to do this. We put the app ratings up like crazy just by shipping functionality. But the real scary thing here is I had to go own this amongst the bigger design org. Like, they were like, essentially like, "Why are you shipping like this?" And I had to explain all this in like a really difficult way, which I could have done better on, of course. I should have done like some cool presentation, but it was essentially saying like, "These are the skills we have, and this is our approach, and this is why it'll work, and this is the strategy." But I only learned all that from the previous experience, and then coming into the new experience with a bit more down to earth and also collaboration, knowing where I fit into the team didn't fit into me. In other words, they're not my people to ship my pixels. That's totally out. Like,
That's cool to
but
see that kind of evolution of how you went from,
Mhm.
yeah, thinking it was all about you to how it did. Now, is that a common evolution of a designer you find, or is that kind of like a junior dev moves to senior and they stop thinking about code linting and things like that, and they start thinking about structure and
Mm,
maintainability? Is that a similar type of progression for a designer?
it's a mix of personality, and also, design level. So I think there are some designers who never grow out of that, and many may stay at agencies or may stay in a certain role and not grow. Um, and then it's some people are built in with this, so they just tend to fit into product really well. I would say some of the best product designers in the world are people who can. It's about what they ship together. It's not about shipping on their own and what they did. It's about what the team does as a whole, and you own that together as a team, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, let's talk more about the team thing. So we've talked about the value of getting along and things like that, but
Mhm.
how do you do that? Like, let's just start with
In
worst
practice,
cases, because those are always my favorite. Worst case, as
yeah.
Dylan often yells at me, like, you're always so worst case. But it's my show, so I'm going to start with worst case. I'm a team. I have designers maybe sitting somewhere else. We have a very adversarial relationship. They, get these designs that come over, and it just everything takes so long, and they're never happy, and maybe even the designers are gating my ability to release my feature. Whatever you kind of think is like the most frustrating situation. If that was me in that position, what would you have to say? What would you recommend?
So the first thing I would recommend is the most simplest thing you can do is just explore together, right? So we're thinking about what we want to build, whether it's a screen um, or like an entire experience, you just need to take that time, whether it's formal or informal, to just hang out, right? And be like, hey, like let's just ideate on this thing for a little bit, because I think that's where it's going to get you really far, right? Like you're building a relationship with that key person. I also think it's very important to remember that they are designer too. Uh, a person who develops experiences, a person who solely works on the front end or otherwise, they're designing things at some level or another. We are all here to solve problems. And the more I have empathy that we all love to solve problems, we do magic, right? Like I can't think of a single developer or designer that doesn't like a problem. I mean, maybe there are problems we hate, but we want to solve them. And I do believe and can kind of prove that if you walk into any sort of like a 15 or 30-minute sync in the morning with that mentality, you're going to solve problems together. So essentially, you let go of your own craft and you aim to solve the problems together. And then you start seeing very healthy things happen. Like, hey, check out this thing over here. Like, let's be real. A lot of the things we make have been perfected already, right? Like, unless we're truly innovating, we may be innovating as a product, but a lot of the things we're focusing on from day to day have been done already. It's just a matter of picking which one works for us. So we get to do that together. And then we actually kind of design together in a way where it's like sometimes I'll design live with somebody, right? And talk through it with them. So like this is something that I've done at every company I've worked at since my transition from those bad experiences. I learned that this was a very, very helpful thing to do.
That's interesting to hear your answer to that, because honestly, that's not what I thought you were going to say.
What do
I
you
think
think I was
when
going to
people
say?
say like, "What's a strategy?" they think, "Oh, you need to adopt Scrum, or you need to use this process or this type of ritual, whatever."
Mhm.
And it makes total sense. And actually, I like your answer a lot more. That no, it's about the relationship. You need to sit down with that
Mhm.
person
Yeah.
and talk back and forth, which is, you're not going to see that in any kind of management book or, 5 steps to this. It's, oh, talk to somebody. It's like, oh, that's too easy. But you're saying that that's actually the most important thing you can do.
Yeah. Talk to someone, have common ground. You both like to solve problems. You can find common ground in that. Yeah. It's a, or talk to people, like on the migrations team at Atlassian, we had 5 people when we started and we had like tremendous amounts of pressure on us. The whole company was looking at us. And it was like, okay, let's just like hang out together and solve this thing together. And it was awesome. Like it was one of the best times I had in my whole life designing. Most memorable, right? Is like working with 4 or 5 people to design something together. And we got to, at this time, it's pre-COVID, of course, we sat in rooms in these Sydney offices and just like would book rooms for like the day and just go crazy. And then we would ask our PM because they're awesome at it. It's like, keep us on the rails. Make sure we're solving the right problem here.
Yeah, because that's the other part that I really like. So one is I liked how you were saying create a relationship. It's about
Mhm.
people. It's about interacting. It's about building that. But then the second thing you said, just to emphasize, is it's we're solving a common problem. We're all working together. And I think that's an easy one to get with design. You started thinking like, oh, design just does whatever they do. And whenever it's ready, then they give it to us. It's very
Yeah.
us versus them. It's a very two separate things. And you're saying,
Mhm.
no, they're not two separate problems. One is design, one's implementation. We're all designers. Is kind of what you said. I really like that. It's a very interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, we're all designers, right? We're all problem solvers. We're all using our craft to solve problems. And in a sense, we all love design to some different, dimension or whatever, right? I think it's really important. Again, I think some of the best products we've ever shipped or have been recognized have been ones that we've acted like this. But there is something here to mention as well. Like some cultures don't allow this. So you have to find ways around this. This may not be the cultural norm at your company. It also may be completely blocked. I can talk about a time when I remember we got a new head of engineering for the team or the project we were on, and they did not. They were like, these are expensive meetings. You're not going to put 4 developers in a room for 3 hours at a time. Like they need to ship code. Like, what are you doing? Like, so it was very hard to see the value of that. So, if you are in those situations, just remember a couple things. Like you can be nimble. You don't have to engage with everyone, and then also engage with the people you want to. Remember, this isn't for everybody. I had a team in Austin one time where two of the developers had never worked that way and didn't want to. And that's okay. Like, I'm not trying to make somebody do something they don't want to, but finding common ground, I think, is the man, it's like the best thing you can do with
Yeah,
anybody.
that makes sense. So far you've been talking about it from a position of what a designer should do. I'm curious on
Mm,
your recommendation for a developer. Let's say that I work in kind of
mm,
that worst case. The
mm,
design's over there. They're throwing things over the wall. There's
mhm.
no communication. What is I as a mid-level developer? What steps should I take?
Yeah, it's a whole and I'm just gonna apologize now if I use this wrong because I just love this thing so much, but it's the positive agitation thing, right? Be the positive agitator. Like, you can show designers and companies things you like. Obviously, if you're building front end, you probably have some idea of cool things you've seen. That is the best way to engage with a designer because that I think it draws something upon you. When someone does that stuff to me, at least, I'm like, oh wow, like that's cool. Like now, not only do we have something to talk about, but then I can kind of see that this person cares as well. So I think if that doesn't work, like if somebody is combative to that, you just have to always be practicing to invite collaboration moments. And I don't think in a way of like, give me your input on this and be like, hey, I wanted to ideate with you on this thing. I had this idea for how this interaction, we could make this interaction better. Or this, I was looking up things, but obviously, you might need to be sensitive because if your designer is not in a very self-aware state, this is going to take a little bit of work. But I love seeing developers who bring good ideas to the table in such a way that is not diminishing. In other words, like, oh, like I saw this one cool product that did this one cool thing, or this one company, even that's a really good one. Hey, Atlassian has like the Atlassian way. Have you ever checked that out? It's super cool. Like they work, that kind of stuff. Because now you're speaking the language of like trends and you're kind of you're breaking down the barriers. So that's the first thing I would say. Next would be definitely invite the collaboration. Don't force it, but invite it.
Yeah,
You also go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, it kind of sounds like what you're talking about. You also have to keep in mind the maturity level of the designer or that kind of thing. Yeah, because if you have, someone right out of design school and, they think that they're the best, you can have a hard time. Although, again, to be fair, you have those kind of developers who think they're the best and so on. So I'm not saying design versus dev in that
Mhm.
particular case. But yeah, so those are kind of, so good things to keep in mind. Not only that you want to push for this, but keep in mind what's going to work with your target audience.
Totally. And yeah, there's one more here I think is really important, worth mentioning is like you definitely need to recommend like recognize when shit isn't going well because you won't stay at that company, right? Like I left companies because I wanted more and to learn more. And I think that that's really important. Like I, in some of those cases, I would have rather have just talked about when things weren't good and improve them rather than like have to leave or something. And in other cases, I think leaving was the best thing to do. But yeah, I think it's just really important to be candid about when things aren't good. Because if you find yourself saying like, "I'll make whatever you want, just tell me how you want it," again, that's like a huge flag. Like you need to have a conversation with your counterparts there about how we can do things better. And it could be as simple as just saying like, "Hey, I feel like when you give me these designs, you're not letting me do my craft entirely. Like we do have some overlap, and we have to recognize our overlap, especially with a front end designer, especially."
Yeah, yeah, that
I
makes
mean, sorry, a
sense.
front end developer. My mistake.
Right, right, right. Who's a little bit more UI knowledgeable.
Mhm, mhm.
I had one final question, and it's a little bit off, but it's something that just I'm curious about, and I've always struggled with this. So here's the thing: when I get a task off the wall as a developer, and it has UI or design aspects, I
Mhm.
always times it by three. Whatever my estimate is, it's now three times. And
Yeah.
that's even in a productive relationship, just because you have a lot more back and forth. I can't just sit down and type it all out. It's going to take some more. I don't know if you've hit this same type of thing, and if so, do you have any recommendations on how a developer should work with the designer to create better estimates and make that a little bit more realistic?
I've actually worked on these where we would do like Fibonacci, like we would be included in the whole like estimation, right? Like our estimates would be included in there. So we would actually sit together, talk a little bit, and flip cards, so you could actually estimate properly. But not every team has that. I'll talk about this a little bit through my perspective of like what I have seen from a designer as well. I think the first thing you can do is talk to the designer. Again, talk about that in your exploration. The most important thing is to explore the solutions right there together. When you get requirements coming in like that, I'll get a message from someone on a team being like, "Hey, we need to build this thing. We should talk about this a little bit." And then we start figuring out like how far do we need to go with the design? Like what's our common ground, right? Like what can we do to make this thing good for the customer, good for the business, and ship in a meaningful, amount of time. Otherwise, we're just be designing forever. So I think again, it's that engagement moment to hit up design and be like, hey, what do you think? Um, but there could be a bigger problem there, which your designer just always thinks everything should be perfect. So I think that's where the real tension would lie. Is essentially like if you were like, hey, I got this task on it, and I've added 3x to it because I know engaging with you is going to suck. And yeah, again, how you solve that, I think it's the relationship building.
Boy, that would be an awkward thing to tell someone. I have this task. Engaging with you sucks. So here's the estimate.
I mean, it's true, right? I mean, I'm sorry. I guess we can be candid in here. I mean, that's kind of how things are perceived sometimes. I've worked with engineers where it's like, and it's not them. It's like the orgs. Like even like look at like I built the org admin for Atlassian, and the first everything we touched was like, can't do that, can't do that. That's 6 months, and you just be like, why? Like, why can't we do anything? So I take it upon myself at that point to really engage deeply with the team and try to understand all the dependencies and solve that problem from a design perspective. My design challenge now has to consider the timeframes of dependencies. And the same with the person. It sounds like you're trying to solve the problem, adding 3x to something because either A, you don't know how long it's going to take and you don't want to engage, or you don't want to engage with that person. So build the relationship,
Yeah,
get to
that,
know more.
that's kind of the message that I'm taking away here, which is build a relationship, and we're all solving the same problem. And I think,
Mhm.
yeah, it almost, in fact, almost the more I think about it, and all the different things you said, and different strategies and different situations, it really comes down to those two things: create human relationships and understand that what you're doing is for everybody, and then things kind of follow from there.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? Like give your designer resources to look up to that show that you care as well. So build those relationships on that kind of stuff, and I think they'll be really grounded and positive. But also talk about it when it's not working. I would rather you say to me like, "Hey Ben, every time we work together, like the estimates go through the roof. Like, how do we solve that? How do we solve that together? I don't want to assume every time I work with you, it's going to be a 4x multiplier because I'm not going to want to work with you. And I hate that we can't always be that direct with people. But there are people at your company that'll help you be direct, or communicate that,
Right.
or
Yeah,
help you
yeah.
do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good. A lot of good information there. Thanks. But before we go, let's open it up to questions from anyone. I know Ringo already has one, all in preparation, so we'll start with that. If
Okay.
anyone else wants any questions, feel free to type them in chat, and we'll be happy to toss it over to Ben. So Ringo's question is user experience like animations and the type of animation, is user experience like animations and the type of animations important to your design?
Yeah, yes, it's definitely one part of the design. I think there are so many layers to design. If you We'll talk about the bottom and top first, but the short answer to this is yes. It is definitely part of the design. You consider it in different parts of the product. Like if you're building a very utilitarian part of the product. So, for example, if I'm like building an admin console, I may not need like tables or things to interact as like gracefully with crazy animations as I do to add delight to a front end experience that would maybe be the hero experience. So, for example, like with Sleuth, when you're on the main dashboard, we may want to add some animations there to really add delight to the experience because you're going to be looking at a lot, right? Um, Whereas the opposite would be like if we have something buried way deep into a system setting that's barely ever touched, we're not gonna. There's just no need to. The expectations are going to be low already.
Yeah, that
But
makes.
yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, yes, that's a really great question. Yeah, especially nowadays, like we're all being trained that everything has animation. So it's one more thing we have to do.
Yep. Speaking of animation, we have a designer in the audience, Daniel,
Mhm.
who has our D type A. He's Daniel. He's the guy who created all these overlays and animations. I don't think it's giving away too much to say that. Super helpful. He has a question. Building relationship takes time. Is there any shortcuts to do that? Like, here's what I do best. Here's what I suck. How can we work? Any recommendations there?
Yeah, totally. I do want to say that I'll caveat all this with like I'm a pretty like assertive person. We talked about before this, so I'm like yelling out the door to my neighbor to meet them and like inviting them to do things. That's not always how people are. Um, but I do think it's important to approach somebody. And if you don't know how to approach somebody or you're awkward with it, take a moment to figure out like simply Google like how do I say hello and ask somebody to to chat or like get to know somebody. Like there's a lot of tips in there, like to be like you know find common ground with somebody and start a conversation. And I think that's the more important thing is like you don't always have to just make it about work, but make it about common ground. So you can quickly identify like so like Dawn and I like we like motorcycles and cameras. We could also talk shit about this kind of stuff as well. Like we like, because there's fun kind of protagonist style conversations we could have here. So I'll try to find common ground on one of those things. What I'm not going to do, for example, the anti pattern is I'm not going to engage with Don about development because I don't know how Don works or what his respect level for me is. So I'll start with something lighter that we have common ground in. And that will naturally transition into the trust where Don would say, "Hey, do you think you could talk to me about this thing? Like we're planning on doing this thing. I wanted to invite you." So you see, it's kind of a catalyst per se. So start with common ground, start with light conversation, finding common ground. That'll lead to comfortability. That'll then lead to interactions that lead to trust. It's worth it for sure. I've worked with people where I've found that I'm too assertive. Like I remember hitting somebody up at Atlassian on my last team and be like, let's like meet and stuff. And they were like, whoa, what? I've never done that before. Like, what do you expect of me? And then they show up and they're like, did you expect me to like have stuff prepared? I'm like, no, I just wanted to say hi. I'm like, they're like, oh, you scared me. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. So yeah, think about your personality versus theirs. That's the big takeaway.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's probably it's going to be different for someone who's not naturally outgoing
Totally. Yeah.
and is a little bit quieter.
Mhm.
They might have to take different type of tacks. But I think the idea of trying to think of common ground and approach them on a human level outside
Mhm.
of work type topics is probably a good place to start on building that relationship.
Biggest investment you can make. Biggest. You want your customers to have great experiences, your team needs to be healthy. Your relationships within that team are critical.
That's good. Those are some good words of wisdom there, Ben. Thanks for coming on. Well, that's all the time we have today. I want to thank my guest, Ben Sanders, and his perspective and advice. Thanks also to Twitch chat for your questions and comments. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you can join our live studio audience on Twitch. Link in the description, or please subscribe to get more information or see more videos as they come out. Thanks again to Daniel for the graphics. And of course, again, as I said, Ben, if you found this format interesting, please leave a comment below. And if you have any suggestions on future topics, we'd love to hear from you as well. Happy deploying. Do you want to ship code more frequently? Are deployment stressful events that you avoid? Well, Sleuth can help, and let me show you how. Sleuth is deployment mission control for shipping continuously. It helps developers coordinate and track the health and progress of deploys so that they have the trust they need to ship code faster. Modernizing a dev team is a tall order, but one that pays off in both productivity and developer happiness. Sleuth might be just what you need to pull it off. Don't
I
need to
think I
get
like got
rides.
driver's license and just immediately crashed my car.
Did you
Switched
really?
lane. I did. Yeah, I switched lanes on the highway all in one day. I remember all the things that happened in one day. I switched earlier in the day. We saw like a suburban on I-95 like flip over and like it was super morbid, tragic, like whatever. And then later on that evening, I switched lanes straight into a sob. The dude got out of the car, grabbed me by the neck, threw me on the ground. I was like 16, Massachusetts
What?
days. Threw me on the ground. I was so sorry. I was so afraid like we were gonna get in trouble. But I think because he like attacked me and I had a witness there, he like didn't report any of it.
None of it? Not even the accident?
Dude, I went home shitting bricks. I'm like, my car's getting taken away. Like, I'm
Yeah.
fucking, like, I'm gonna be at the police station. Like, this is my first day with my license, and I fucked it up.
Oh my
You just
God.
feel like that as a kid. You're like, you remember being a kid. You're like, oh my god, what did I do? Yeah,
Sure, But I
Yeah.
feel like if someone dragged me out of a car and threw me on the ground, no matter what my age,
He I don't
holy
think he
shit.
dragged me out. I was out and then he threw me on the ground. He actually grabbed
Oh,
me by like my shirt and threw me. And I wasn't like I think I was kind of playing dumb. I'm like, "Oh, like I think you might have turned into me," but he definitely not. Shout out if you're ever out there, bro. That was definitely my fault.